Welcome to the Real Math of Business with Alena Bennett. This week we are celebrating being on air for 1 year. And what I'd like to do is share some wonderful moments that we've had with our guests over the course of the past year. Enjoy. Success really comes down to this question of, well, what do you want? And that's really scary for a lot of people. I would love to know, what are so you said that people struggle to answer that question, and quite often they just kind of give you a half-baked answer. I'd love to, maybe if you can use one of your clients as an example, I'd love to know the thought processes that you take them through to get to the final answer. So what's their initial statement or thought? What is their experience? Like, do they look at you when you're like probing them and they're like, Cruz, why are you asking me this question? Like, isn't it obvious? I'd just love to know, because I personally think that is the question.
Yeah.
That is the question. What do you want? Can you take us through what that conversation and that thought process sounds like?
Well, I mean, first, let me share an insight that is going to, like, it's gonna make everything land so much easier after I say it. In my opinion, in my experience, after being in corporate for so many years, and now, like, being a business owner and also helping other business owners in their own businesses, I can tell you that 95% of business problems are actually mindset problems. And also, yes, and also when people think about finance, they think about numbers, but they don't think of finance as being a language. And from my perspective, I don't do numbers. I speak the language of business, which is finance. So I'm kind of like a translator. You know what I mean? Like you say, like, oh, this is what I want to do. It's like, okay, these are the numbers. So I just I think about it in a completely different way, and I see it as my job to basically find the spark that my founders have, and sort of like that creative sort of spark that they can't really put into words. I help them. I tease it out so that we can actually create business plans and create strategies that allow us to accomplish them. Because in the end, a strategy without numbers, it's good, but it's not complete. You need
Mm.
numbers, you need metrics, you need milestones, you need ways to measure whether you're making progress towards the accomplishment of the goal or not. And you need to be able to also parse it out so that, if you think of like, business strategy as being sort of a cycle that has
Mm.
many steps, like an assembly line, right?
Yes.
And the assembly line starts with lead generation and it ends in cash, right? So between those, between lead generation and cash, you have many steps, right? You have, like, from lead generation, you go to conversion. From conversion, you go to delivery. From delivery, you go to retention. From retention, you go to revenue. And from revenue, you go to cash. So we have to find the right metrics in each of those boxes that allows us to see where the constraint for accomplishing the objective is. So I use theory of constraints for analyzing and helping my clients accomplish their goals, because basically using physics. Because I mean, the theory of constraints comes from like physics. So I use kind of like physics and mindset and then numbers to help them go where they're going. Jaw dropping.
Yeah, jaw dropping. And
Yeah.
I literally just dropped my pen. So what I'm hearing is that actually biggest shift when we're talking about business and finance, we actually need to be talking about mindset and language. So if 95% of business problems are mindset problems, what is the mindset problem that most commonly presents itself?
Yeah, it's the one that presents itself in every area of our life. It's fear. It's, imposter syndrome. It's fear of success, which is actually comes on like fear of success. I want success. Well, a lot of people that I know are scared of being successful. And you're like, how is that possible? It
Yeah.
is possible. Yeah, because it is, we all have different stories. Okay. And we tell ourselves that we want certain things, but in reality, we live in a state of fear and we get addicted to that. And the thought of like being a person that is not in living in that reality subconsciously drive us to self-sabotage, to not make the decisions that we have to make, and to postpone the decisions that we have to make in order to accomplish the goals. We do it subconsciously. Nobody says, oh yeah, I'm going to make decisions that are going to go against my own, benefit. Nobody
Yeah.
does that, right? Consciously, but they do it subconsciously.
Wow. Wow. Okay, so where most people that you're working with have a subconscious fear, and that could be imposter syndrome, or it could be fear of success, or it could be a combination of both, and we are addicted to that fear. Like, it's the adrenaline that drives us, which actually, as I say that out loud, that makes complete sense,
Yes.
because we run faster because we're running away from the tiger that's chasing us, right? Which is a fear thing.
Which is all in our head, by the way. It probably doesn't even exist, but yeah, we
Yeah,
run
yeah,
away from it.
correct. Because
Yeah.
there are lots of things in Australia that can kill you, but a
Yes.
tiger is not going to chase me down the street, right? Get to that point. Like, when you work, I'm just so fascinated by this, right? How do you uncut? How, in your conversations and the work you do with your clients, how do you uncover that?
I just ask them questions. And the problem is you can't take anyone to a place that you have not been. So I've been there. I've been afraid of success. I've had imposter syndrome. Like all these things that I'm talking about, these are not like things that I read on a textbook. I have read them on a textbooks, yes, but I've experienced them myself in the corporate world and as an entrepreneur, and doing all of the inner work that I do as part of like my preparation as a leader of my clients. I'm very aware that these dynamics are taking place because they play a role in how we manage our companies. They play a role in how we manage our leadership, how we show up for our people,
Mm.
the way that we communicate, the way that we solve problems, okay, and the way that we're able to inspire others or not.
It's like one of the main reasons I wanted to get you on this podcast. I said to Jez, my producer, my amazing producer, I said, you know what's fascinating about all of this, Jez? I said, I hated economics at uni. I hated auditing and accounting and econometrics and anything to do with numbers. Yet here I am hosting a podcast called The Real Math of Business. I'm about to publish the book with the same name. Where did I go wrong at university? So, my question to you, and this is really putting your academia hat on, why didn't why did I sit, why didn't I get it then? And why did I not get it to the point where I'm really shaming myself here? Stop turning up to lectures, stop turning up to tutorials, not doing the readings. Like, I was so disengaged in the conversation. Yet I am frothing at this conversation now. And all of this, like, this is what really fascinates me. I think we probably share a mutual fascination of the relationship between the economy and business structures and people and reward mechanisms, right? But when I sat there at university, I just thought this was the most boring thing. Where did I go wrong? What was I missing? What was the missing link for me?
You necessarily went wrong anywhere. Partially it is our job as lecturers to keep students engaged, right? So maybe it's not on you; it's on your lecturers, and I don't want to shame anyone, but part of it is kind of actually contextualizing it. Part of it is actually just part of the journey, I think. So we can come back to this whole idea of trying to get students engaged, contextualizing um, the importance of what the social sciences are, and finance ultimately is part of the social sciences and how fascinating they are.
Can
But
we
it
just,
also,
sorry, I'm just going to pause you right there. That is such, that's such a Kodak moment in language. Can you just repeat that statement?
well, finance is part of the social sciences, and there's no two ways about it. Just think
Explain
about
that.
it.
Explain that.
Yeah, exactly. So, well, finance is part of business, right? Well, not only, we can kind of go more abstract, but let's just look at it like that. Finance is part of business, any firm, any organization is a social structure. And therefore, how it operates and the laws that govern how decisions are made, how outcomes are driven, are very much driven by the same dynamics that we would look in political sciences, etc. Again, I know your podcast looks very much into leadership, etc. And absolutely, leadership is important, but part of the things that really interest me is, well, are decisions by leaders shaped by the various forces, some of them obvious, but some of them less obvious, more hidden. So in finance, for example, we would say that investors, to a large extent, shape decisions, because if the governance structures work well, leaders are nothing more than cut out figures that all they do is try to push forward the interests of shareholders. Obviously, that's not true. There's an element of truth in it, and we can't dispel that. But just the very fact that it is not true, and we know it from research, yet at the same time, we have governance structures, a whole corporations act, and then informal structures which very much try to drive that outcome. Yet there are so many different forces that drive outcomes. So it is a social science. If we're trying to understand how organizations make decisions, we have to see it as a social science. There's a human element behind every transaction. If you know better than me in academia, but when a company needs to raise money, there's a very strong trust component that underpins that element, right? You can't just do what we teach kind of in the textbook, where you just issue a bond and the money flows in. And that kind of feeds into this idea of information asymmetry, etc. Long story short, it's a social science, and we have to see it as such. And therefore there's a context that has to be kind of explained in a kind of more training element. But there are very significant tools, and this is it. A university degree ultimately has a finite amount of time, has students who are all at a different level of maturity, at a different state of life in terms of what they're looking for, what their aspirations are. And ultimately, I guess we have, we need to convey, those tools in as quick a manner as possible. And it's those tools that can very often kind of hide the essence of why the tool is used. And I think that's probably what you experienced. There was too much emphasis, or at least the way you perceived it. You saw the tools, but couldn't really see the why. Why is this important? And that actually is a problem, because later on they can shape someone's mindset. If you're really good in just understanding the tool, and all you know is a tool, and then you go into practice and you see the application of the tool, you're not really necessarily questioning that tool, where it's appropriate, where it's not. And that's not necessarily what academia should do. So I think that we need to be teaching the thinking element, and we need to be articulating to students very, very early on and throughout the whole degree that whole aspect of these are tools, imperfect tools in a really complex system, and social systems are far more complex and hard to describe than natural systems.
Yes. Wow. And that actually, it almost brings us back to that sort of three-tiered, well, four, if you say tools is the fourth, that four-tiered approach of we've got a reality, money's a proxy for that reality. We we measure metrics to drive money, and the tools help us achieve the metrics. So what you've just described there from an education perspective, and I think you're absolutely right, because one of the things that those weird things that stay in your mind. I have this weird thing that stuck in my mind from one of the accounting courses, and we had to do T accounts and get them into the general ledger. And the whole thing just was so complicated. And then I went out into audit and I was like, this is simple. Like, why were they giving us these general ledger made up of 500 different accounts, and actually what really matters is these 20? Or like, why did they make this so complicated? And I think just even going, there's a reality, money's the proxy, the metrics and the tools, like you say, it's that contextual thing that maybe I was missing, the context being the reality, and then understanding the bridge between the reality and the tools.
I would just add, and this kind of ties, and maybe we'll have time to kind of dig into it. One of the parts that I'm most interested in my research is, those how organizations make decisions, but I'm most interested in the innovative,
Yes.
innovation outcomes, innovation, especially radical breakthrough forms of innovation. That's interesting because there's a whole host of paradoxes. And funnily enough, most of the things that drive great success in terms of performance, efficiency, etc., those are the exact opposite that we need to drive breakthrough innovation. Now, I only mention it here because it occurred to me when you were saying about, how also the delivery was structured. Part of it, in academia, we face exactly the same challenges that a lot of companies face, in the sense the expectation is that we have to convert every concept. So if we have a subject on auditing, it has to be a, 11 to 13 week structure, and we have to break it down into weeks. And that very often itself, and I've experienced that myself when there's a subject I want to teach and there's certain concepts I want to teach, but actually breaking it down into those modules is extremely difficult, and it's a big chunk of the challenge of being a good educator. But it is a delivery model that students expect, the universities expect, and it's not really kind of a mistake, I think, by universities, because
Yeah.
that's the expectation, that there's
Yes.
accreditation bodies that expect it, etc. But I guess that kind of does highlight there is, like across the board, including in academia, there are questions about, well, what's the most innovative approach where we can convey the idea, right? And there's probably in the natural sciences and in the social sciences and in every different course, in an ideal world, you would package that idea slightly differently, but you kind of have to package it in a given way. And sometimes that form of packaging doesn't necessarily translate into the best outcomes. So, and I assume it's exactly the same problems that, every business faces, right?
Yes.
It's this idea of needing to standardize certain elements to make it work. There's a tradition to it, but it can result in the idea being a little bit distorted, right?
Like there's this matrix of capacity and desire. And if you have lots of desire and not much capacity, you end up struggling. Like you really try really hard because you really want to do great things and you really want to, succeed and accomplish great things, but you just haven't figured out the capacity bit. So you end up struggling. And this is where your burnout people end up, right? Like this is where you end up overworked, you overpromise, you underdeliver, and you struggle, right? And then at the opposite quadrant where you've got lots of capacity, but not much desire, you end up sleepwalking. Like, could you imagine anything worse than sleepwalking through life?
Yeah. Very unsatisfying.
You've got all the talent, all the EQ, all the IQ, and you've just given up. So you show up to work and you check the clock, you punch in, you punch out, and you go home and you watch TV. Those are your sleepwalkers. High capacity, low desire. And then you've got your bottom quadrant where you've got low capacity and low desire. And those are your survivors. And everyone thinks that survivors are toxic or they're resistant, but they're really just depleted. They have low capacity, they have low desire, and they're just trying to get by the next day. They're really quite depressed. And it's usually once you're in survival mode, it's a steady decline further and further into survival mode.
Mm.
And then up in the top corner, where you've got high desire and high capacity, these are your shapers. These are the people that create the future. They're the change makers. They're the ones that take the business, industry, culture into the future. And they also take everyone else along with them. And so to answer your question about, people that have had life easy, that are like in their 50s and,
Yeah.
can they have purpose? I believe they can. They might be sleepwalkers at the moment, but like we can ignite purpose in them because they've got capacity. We just need to move them into shaper territory.
Love that.
And if we don't, they become survivors. Because in this chart, the pull is to where there's alignment. And there's 2 places with alignment in this chart, and it's in survival mode or in shaper mode.
We'll put a proper one up when we put the recording.
Yeah, I can send you the diagram.
I've just been drawing. That's incredible. That makes a whole lot of sense. And, even I love that you've actually, we couldn't have timed this perfect because we do need to wrap up shortly. If people can just identify where they are in this matrix of yours, that is incredibly empowering. Why should organizations stop measuring engagement?
Great question. I think they should stop measuring engagement because it's driving the wrong behaviors. And when I say the wrong behaviors, what I mean by that is leaders are being really reactive because they're getting paid on it. And then that reaction is causing them to put things in place that they normally wouldn't. Their people see it, they understand it, they get it. They know that one moment you're behaving like this, and then all of a sudden you're behaving in the opposite way. And so therefore, one of the outcomes we want to get from an engaged workforce is that people trust us, that they believe in us. And so we do the opposite. We end up actually not trusting because we just see this swing in behavior and then we don't see it continue either. So that does even more to diminish trust. So I would say stop these engagement metrics, stop putting them in place because you're doing more damage to the very things that you want to get from engagement.
Okay. Now, I know you say that with all the love and respect for the P&C professionals working hard on this right now because you've been there, done that. You've worn the t-shirt, right? So what? So if I'm going to put myself in this, and I'm like, actually, I had to calculate bonuses once in my former life, right? So I had to work with the P&C people who said this is where everything is at. And that spreadsheet, it's highly confidential. You are dealing with people's livelihoods because of them. It's influencing the money that they're going to get paid. I'm listening to this and I'm going, you've just shifted my paradigm. Like you are spot on. What you have just said, Kylie, is exactly what I see. What do I do now? Like I can't put pens down. I can't go, nah, not going to do this. This is so wrong. What do I do?
Yeah, great question. Well, firstly, I wouldn't be changing that right now. I would be paying those poor people their bonuses because that's what they were expecting.
Yeah.
My approach has always been, in the spirit of engagement, is to involve those that are affected in the conversation. So I would actually be pretty upfront with this is what we're seeing with engagement and this is what's not working. And it's become a metric and we want to remove it as a metric. But one of the reasons that we do, or, go through the reasons that we do, but the one thing that we don't want to happen is to have a disengaged, disconnective and dismissive workforce. So what are the solutions? So work with the leaders who are paid on these bonuses to come up with those solutions. Now, they might not necessarily have all the answers, but again, involving them in that would be the first the first step. And what I love about that is you're actually modeling what you want them to behave, like the behaviors that you want them to engage when it comes, or embody when it comes to engagement. And you're solving a problem without getting caught up in an outcome and a metric.
It's so fascinating because it's interesting because you said get them involved, and then I went back to your informed, involved, and inspired. I'm putting myself back into my sort of senior leader days where I go, wow, if someone did come to me and said, hey, this is what's really going on, information, we would like you to participate in a better solution involvement. That actually would lead to me being quite inspired, because I would be thinking, wow, they're really it's quite courageous to challenge this notion of engagement, where we know that billions of dollars is poured into that globally across organizations every year. It's interesting. I can see your informed, involved, inspired model play out quite easily in that conversation.
There's a couple of other things I'm just thinking as we're going that I would also add is, I think we have to, when it comes to engagement, we have to look at the systems and structures we have in place as well, because the ways in which we engage people are, and I mentioned this in my book, are just those one-on-one, like those one-on-one conversations, and that time that we have with people is a form of engagement. The types of meetings we have, the like Flight Centre, we used to call them the vehicles of inspiration, and they were really big on, like, that was a way to engage people without even measuring it. So we used to say that the vehicles of inspiration were, make sure that you have one-on-ones with your people, and you do talk about the numbers, but you also connect with them on a personal level. We used to talk about how important it was to have monthly meetings with team members and leaders, like all the normal things that you have. They also had reward and recognition nights that they called buzz nights, but they were all vehicles of inspiration, and there were 3 things that you were required to do with those. One is that everybody felt connected to a bigger purpose, that everybody walked away feeling inspired to act on whatever you spoke about, and that they felt connected and engaged to the company, to the work that they were doing, and to you as a leader. And that's why we called them the vehicles of inspiration. So I think that's an important thing to think about as well.
Reading The Wealth of Nations again, just for the element, but basically the concept of, and it's a heavy read, I got to say, but it's the concept of value exchange is the principle in capitalism I love, right? And that means that I have a product or a service, and it's the celebration. Most SME owners begin as technicians, right, at something, and they think, I can do that better, right? Or for whatever reason, I want more autonomy and do that, right? Whatever their motivations are, and this is what I mean by vision. But it's that, you look at that value exchange where you build a product or you deliver a service, and then you're paid for it, right? And that's the part, and then the whole algorithm and the pricing and all those concepts in capitalism, that's where capitalism, I think, makes sense. As we evolved as the bourse, and as we evolved, I mean, the Joint Stock Act was founded in 1848 in the UK. We, the celebration of trading stocks is a pretty young idea, really, right? And just out of interest, in my research, Adam Smith wrote The Wealth of Nations in 1776. The average size of a business was 15. So I believe that capitalism is broken into, there's a big dichotomy here. So I think I'm an SME capitalist, which I think is entirely different to a lot of capitalism nowadays. A lot of financial capitalism's the other branch, I call it. Now, I understand financial capitalism exists and it needs to exist. And I understand that, many big things need lots of capital. And so I appreciate that. I guess what I don't appreciate is how we've truly neglected, really investing in this idea that SME capitalism is different, and we need to understand that we need to build different legislation, different education systems, have different stewardship systems for and the big one, different funding and financial flows for SME capitalism. So I look at the world as, if we can just build this over here, financial capitalism will look after itself, right? But if we let SME capitalism die, we are destined to oligopoly, monopoly, duopoly, and that does not seem, and like our regions will die, like
Mhm.
there's just so many good reasons, right? And to build a strong society, to it's capitalism that distributes wealth and power, right? As opposed to concentrating it. And I just don't think that the way we're heading is very healthy. So yeah. So there you go. You've got the background as to why I care.
Well, yes, and I just want to stay at that really macro level because I think that sets a really beautiful context for when we get into the nitty-gritty. So can we just continue a little bit? I'd love to hear your vision for the future. So when we've got these, when we get the SME capitalism branch right, what does that look like? How would we know that balance of financial capitalism and SME capitalism, what does that look like? Tell me what the layperson, or maybe what would the layperson notice as different about the ecosystem if and when we got this SME capitalism branch right?
Okay, so at the moment, because we don't have a conscious way of funding small medium enterprises, we have no way to direct the $4 trillion in our superannuation system into the SME economy. There's no mechanism for that, and so it what I think will end up, if we're successful, we will build new banks and things like patient capital exchanges, a place where an SME can list and it's a dividend market, and that they can get capital, and the way that the investor gets their return, they eventually do get a return on their capital, but in the interim, they get a dividend return. So I would imagine that we have something like the SME 500 or the SME 1000. So it's an index fund. And the beauty of SMEs is that they're cross geography, cross industry. So you could build an index fund with SMEs. It's just amazing. I mean, outperform the other side. So and by the other side, I'm not having a crack at financial capital. I realize its need to exist. I just think that if we focus on this and we mobilize, if we've mobilized 5-10% of our superannuation fund, and there was asset classes that were starting to bloom in the SME sector, I just feel that our society will start to reap all the benefits. Now, the benefits will be, I believe, we talk about biodiversity, well, we need commercial diversity, right? And another term for financial capitalism is aggregation capitalism. So at the moment, we've got Pac-Man running around buying everything up, and they've got all the money. And then the SMEs go, okay, I'll tell you a story. In 18, I want to build a DApp to go and help other SME owners build high quality stewardship systems. Why? Because if we don't solve the stewardship problem first, if we don't have high levels of SME stewardship, we can never get a dollar. But if we solve the stewardship problem, right, we can then start to, inspire, entrepreneurs into the building of the new banks. We can inspire entrepreneurs into the building of new exchanges, and we can start to mobilize that $4 trillion. Now, all I'm saying is 10%. But 10% of, sometimes I say 5%, but let's go for 10%. 10% of $4 trillion, $400 billion. If you put a $400 billion injection into the SME economy, we would be the most standout country. And I feel that this is for those people that have a more central view on politics and don't want to get polar, right? This is an idea that appeals to the left and the right. I don't know anyone that says, oh no, let's not look after the SME economy. Right? The other thing that I've learned is that you are going to slowly but surely crush a lot of innovation if you only fuel aggregation, because corporations are not good at innovating. They just aren't, right? And so consequently, we've built a sort of startup industry that at the moment, I think everybody's an early stage SME, but a lot of people think of themselves as early stage corporation. And I think that my belief is that if we don't watch out, the only place an SME can go is to be bought by a corporation. And if that is the only destination, right, that's a very sad place. Yes, because the owner, what I've learned about SME owners is their visions are extraordinarily rich. They're not, like at the moment, the assumption is make me money. Well, I'll tell you that most of these people treat their businesses like their next kid, their other kid. And so consequently, this idea that because the people in the business that have actually helped them achieve what they wanted, with especially for, financial security, right? The last thing they want to do is see them harmed when the sale takes place. And harmed they are, that's so often. And I think that we just need to be better than that. We need to create. I would have taken a lower valuation, and I would have supported the employees to actually acquire at that lower valuation if we had banks, transition capital. And this is a big issue. There's a lot of baby boomer SMEs, and some of those businesses aren't really that suitable for selling, but they're great businesses creating great value. What's their future?
So the lessons you've learned about showing up in the air and how you show up on the ground, because, if we talk about vulnerability and risk in the air is very, very physically real. And, when we're on the ground in a corporate environment, we are talking about sort of less threatening things like a bad performance review, losing our job, and all the rest of it. So I would love to hear the lessons you've learned in the air and how you see them show up on the ground.
That's a great question. I think one of the main ones is I've done lots of things in aviation that are intense and have high risk attached. And those situations force you to focus. So they force you to remove distraction and actually get down to, if we take an aeroplane, the really critical things that are keeping that plane in the air. So even if the engine stops, you need airspeed, you need to know how high you are, and you need to know where you're going. And as long as you can pick those three things, if you look at a cockpit of an airplane, it's full of instrumentation, buttons and switches. None of that matters if you are not controlling your airspeed. You don't know how high you are and you don't know where you're going. And when I fly aerobatics, two things matter in aerobatics: height and airspeed. So if you're high, you can convert height to airspeed. If you're low, you need speed to be able to convert that to height. So you're trading two dynamics. And you can literally fly aerobatics by just managing those two pieces of information. Now, in business, what we do is we overwhelm ourselves. We sit with dashboards and data lakes, and we have people bringing us reports with 90 slides in them and Excel, and now we're using AI to try and consolidate it, and we're overwhelmed with information. And a lot of the time, we haven't picked the one or two dials that in stress we need to focus on. So they could be business metrics. They could be early indicators that warn us that something is going right or something's going wrong. And also the levers. So what are we trading? If we've got time, but we don't have money, how can we use time to create money? If we've got money, but we don't have time, how do we use money to buy people to create time, for instance? Just getting down to those really basic dynamics and doing it when it's calm, because it's very hard to do it in stress. So studies are a stretch. I find aviation accident reports fascinating, and right the way through to shuttle disasters. And the reason is we spend an awful lot of money investigating aviation accidents, and we spend very little money investigating business crashes. So you go back to GFC 2007, major failure of the global financial markets. And there'll be a few case studies in the Harvard Business Review about it. If we lose a space shuttle, we'll spend $100 billion understanding why it crashed. And we'll spend 5 years with thousands of people poring over everything we possibly can to understand not just the physical failure, but the human factors. And the human factors for aviation disasters are the same as business failures, because we're people. We're people making systems, we're people making decisions, and we're wired to behave in certain ways. And one of those is it's very difficult to be rational under stress. So if we haven't thought about our stress response and therefore our plan as to what we're going to do in stress, we're not going to figure it out when we're in stress. So the time to figure out how an aeroplane flies is not when it's not flying. It's to figure that out. And you learn this thing called primacy, which is get the absolute basics dialed in super early on in your training, so that as your training becomes more advanced and your situations potentially become more difficult to manage, you can go back to primacy under pressure. And one of the challenges is when we change situations. So if I go from flying an aeroplane to a helicopter, the controls are different, and primacy can now become a problem because I've got to unlearn things. And this is where it gets hard to unlearn as we get older and change situations. So that focus, having a backup, as in know where to go under pressure, knowing how to clear things out of the way to get to focus. So what really matters? What are the levers that you can pull, particularly under stress? I would say they are probably like high level. It's things that come from aviation because they have to. Like these are the things we know will keep us safe, that are harder to get to in business because someone knocking on your door gets your attention, which is similar to an aeroplane window blowing open in flight. But the aeroplane window blowing open in flight won't kill you. The distraction from the aeroplane window in flight will kill you. And someone knocking on your door when you're doing an important task is the same distraction. We just don't equate it to the same level of danger.
I want to delve deeper into this idea of discomfort, because I think so much of us, particularly in the workplace, spend so much time, effort and energy trying not to be wrong, trying not to be uncomfortable, because we perceive it as being a sign of weakness. We talked before this conversation around how our children, our beautiful children, can derail us before we've even come to work. And that happens to almost everybody. Doesn't need to be children. It can be traffic. It can be the news. It can be a client on the phone. Yet we walk in and we put on that mask. We don't allow ourselves to be vulnerable. Tell us, I'd love to know from an expert in well-being, tell us more about this benefit. It's the benefit and value, I'll say, the value of allowing yourself to be uncomfortable. When you are uncomfortable, what value can you extract for yourself and your organization that you can't if you allow yourself to sit in that circle of perceived safety?
Yeah. Yeah, the thing that's coming to mind at the moment is, and it comes back to someone you've spoken to actually, Dara Sintkin, on the power of play.
Yes.
So I had a really enlightening conversation with her recently where she was talking to my team about the power of play, and that makes us deeply uncomfortable. And a lot of us don't do that anymore. I think one of the reasons why what she's doing is so powerful is it actually does encourage people to sort of sit in vulnerability and discomfort and make space for creativity and things like that. What do I think will come from that? I mean, I think for most leaders, it's a deeply uncomfortable proposition to sit in I don't know. But I think one of the things that happens when leaders sit in the discomfort of I don't know is that it creates space for others who are maybe deeper in the organization, who don't sit at the top, to actually experiment and come up with ideas. It makes space for new thinking to emerge, I think. I think that's one thing. I think there's something very humbling about sitting in that discomfort. I mean, the discomfort that I most find difficult is actually with my kids. They are definitely completely discombobulate me, because I think when I'm at work, I feel very in control. As a
Yes.
parent, I'm completely out of control. And that just this idea of self-regulating is really hard, to feel feelings and to find space between the stimulus and the response. Even in that space,
Yes.
is incredibly challenging as a parent.
And
Yeah.
it's such a useful, thank you for sharing that, because A, I am on your team with that one. But B, it's something that's so relatable. And I love this idea of, how do you find the space between the stimulus and the response? And then I'm thinking, well, in the corporate workplace, not only are you trying to grapple with the space or the uncertainty that sits between the stimulus and response, but you've also got this layer of expectation. Which actually, you can extend the parent analogy, because of course, don't we just wish there was a parenting guidebook, but there's not. Yet there are these expectations that parenting is done a certain way, it looks a certain way. But in an organization, there are quite often very clear expectations. So how do you ask yourself the question, or how do you sit in the space of I don't know between stimulus and response with this expectation of the business around you? That's scary.
It is scary. But I think it's okay to say, can we come back to this, and just to not feel that you need to solve it in that moment. I think we'd be wrong to suggest that people don't feel deep feelings when they're at work. I mean, I often do as well. Like you mentioned a client or something before, you get feedback from someone.
Yes.
And sometimes in responding in that moment when you are deeply in amygdala hijack,
Yes.
responding in that moment is probably not the best thing, because we need to actually be able to go for a walk, or just go off deep breaths, or go splash some water on our face in the bathroom, to then come back with a more measured response. And I think nobody judges you for that. And in fact, I think other people learn just as much, if not more, from you when you actually aren't this perfect human. Like permission to, I like to say that to myself. I like to say it to my clients, permission to be human.
Yeah.
People are like, oh yeah, let's just take a deep sigh, have a deep sigh of relief. Realize we don't actually have to be robots. Those are probably coming.
Yeah. And thank you all for listening to The Real Math of Business with Alena Bennett. If you liked this episode, remember to subscribe for more content and stay on top of The Real Math of Business. I've been Alena Bennett. Thank you for listening.